This movie definitely needed more Blue Oyster Cult. And more cowbell. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. With the upcoming release of Godzilla vs. Kong, today I'm going to be kicking off my MonsterVerse review series with the 2014 monster film, Godzilla. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Godzilla stars Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ken Watanabe, and Elizabeth Olsen, and was directed by Gareth Edwards. Serving as an American reboot of the Godzilla franchise, it tells the story of Naval Lieutenant Ford Brody, played by Aaron Taylor Johnson, who gets caught up in the military attempt to stop giant radioactive monsters. Godzilla is such a universal pop culture icon. Obviously, he's had an extensive 8-decade-long movie run, appearing in almost 40 films, but his iconic status runs much deeper than the movies alone. He's one of those characters whose name and image has been ingrained in the consciousness of pretty much everybody. You can take somebody who's never seen a Godzilla movie in their life and show them a picture of Godzilla and they'd be able to name him. That's pretty rare, an honor reserved for only some of the most iconic cinematic characters of all time. Aside from an early Americanized adaptation and Roland Emmerich's 1998 reimagining, Godzilla had been a Japanese franchise. But with this 2014 reboot, Legendary brought production back to Hollywood for only the second time and laid the groundwork for what would become their MonsterVerse franchise. Growing up, I always liked monster movies. Creature features were pretty fun for me, and I always enjoyed the Universal monsters and their various iterations too. But I gotta admit, I've never been a big fan of kaiju movies. I saw a decent number of them as a kid, a handful of the Godzillas, King Kong, Mighty Joe Young if you want to stretch and call that one, but there was always just something about them that didn't grab my attention the way that other monster movies did. Even as I got a bit older and the genre saw a popularity resurgence, the movies felt excessively silly to me. In fact, the first time I watched this 2014 Godzilla, I thought it was kind of underwhelming and very ridiculous. Perhaps those two things still hold true, but I have to say, rewatching this for the first time in 4 years or so, I enjoyed it quite a bit more than I remembered. Although it might be frustrating to some people, one of the things I really appreciate about this film is its classic monster movie setup. Yeah, this may have been the 30th Godzilla movie, but it was the first in this rebooted franchise, so I like that they didn't just jump in with the monster destruction. There's a bit of a mystery element regarding Godzilla and the Mutos in the first half of the film, and it takes its time building up to the eventual reveals. We certainly get plenty of Godzilla in the second half, but our first glimpses of him are just that, glimpses. We see some entertainingly crafted archival footage and images, a few crocodile-like shots of his dorsal spikes while he's underwater, a close-up of a foot as he stomps by, the swish of a tail as he disappears around a building, but it's not until the hour mark that we finally get a full reveal. Again, it's surely frustrating for some people, but I think it was a very effective move to build up tension and anticipation, kinda reminiscent of the reveal in Jaws. So, with Godzilla himself being on the back burner for about half of the film, there's a surprising amount of focus on human characters. That's not necessarily a bad thing in a monster movie. Again, take Jaws for example, but it ends up being a little problematic here. The film really tries to foster a connection between us as the audience and the human characters. We're meant to care about them. And the movie does a decent enough job with that towards the beginning. The father-son relationship was kinda compelling, but when the character focus shifted pretty much exclusively to Ford, it loses a lot. You don't really feel for him the way the movie wants you to. And then the second half of the film becomes the monster spectacle show, so you care even less about the humans. Between that unbalanced quality and the disconnect with Ford, any sort of intended emotional payoff with the humans just feels kind of hollow and tacked on. Since this is a Godzilla movie, we've gotta talk about the monsters. Before we're introduced to the king of monsters himself, we get some time with the Muto, or the massive unidentified terrestrial organism. His introduction is a little weird and kinda confusing in the moment, but the information you learn as the film goes on helps to elucidate things a bit more. The Mutos are a little silly looking at times, and really remind me of the monster from Cloverfield. Godzilla, on the other hand, looks pretty fantastic. The scale and size of him is just crazy, and despite how reptilian he looks, he's got unexpectedly expressive eyes. Plus, his atomic breath and its associated charge up is just so cool looking. Speaking of cool looking, we've got to go beyond just the monsters themselves and talk about the monster fights. While Legendary's Monsterverse has been a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to story, the visuals have always been impressive. The brighter scenes, especially with the Mutos, are okay, but the dark and smoky San Francisco showdown is the monster spectacle you're hoping for when you go to see a movie like this. It's completely ridiculous, but it's also so satisfying and cool to watch. And this film really showcases the sheer size of these monsters by providing a lot of scale. Buildings, cars, humans, but also by shooting most of the fights from a human vantage point. It's not quite to the extent of Cloverfield with the whole found footage thing, but it still puts you right in the thick of things, which somehow makes it all feel more reasonable. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro has definitely got to be the monster fights. That's probably not much of a surprise in a modern CG crafted kaiju movie, but they're pretty fun. Like I said before, the Mutos are a little goofy looking, especially in the more brightly lit scenes, so there are a handful of shots where the 2014 CGI is a bit dodgy, but the San Francisco sequence is pretty much all good, in terms of visuals at least. Watching Godzilla and the Mutos clash is big, dumb monster movie fun, and those atomic breath shots are just extra satisfying. The second pro is the score. Now that's probably not something that a lot of people focus on in a movie like this. I know I didn't the first time I watched it, but it really jumped out to me during this rewatch. In a good way. It was very noticeable to me this time, but I thought it fit really well with its thumping percussion and mixture of bass and strings. I gotta admit, I was pretty surprised when I looked and saw that this score was composed by Alexander Desplat of all people. On the con side, my big issue is how unbalanced this film feels. I get that it's a monster movie. It's a kaiju film, so the big giant fighting monsters are the main draw and focus. So I can't really fault a movie like this for having some underwhelming human characters or spending most of its time on the monsters. The problem is, this movie is almost two different films. First, it's sort of a character-driven mystery drama, where the humans are the main focus. But after the Honolulu sequence, it switches and becomes a monster movie. Characters that were set up as if they were gonna be important for the story are occasionally shown, but don't really serve a purpose. And so after all the monster destruction, when the film tries to suddenly tie the humans back in with an emotional story beat, it just feels insincere and like it was tacked on to stave off complaints of unresolved story threads. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Godzilla or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Godzilla 3 out of 5 paws. This is on the lower side of 3 paws for me, but like I said before, I enjoyed this a lot more than I have in the past, so I bumped it up a bit from my previous rating. It's ridiculous, but it's fun, and has some pretty cool Godzilla action. I would recommend Godzilla to people who are already fans of kaiju films or are interested in getting into them, but maybe aren't all that experienced with Godzilla. I do think some existing Godzilla fans will like seeing this rebooted version of the character, especially in terms of the visuals, but I think that others may be a bit disappointed by the lack of a strong thematic core. And if you're just looking for some non-stop action, just be aware that this film takes until about the halfway point before the monster stuff really gets going. If you liked Godzilla, I would recommend the original 1954 Godzilla. This is the Japanese film that kicked it all off, and while this 2014 reboot pays some homage, it's quite a bit different. The original film has a good deal more thinly veiled social commentary regarding nuclear weapons, and the visuals are a little different, making extensive use of suitmation and scale models. If you like the almost point-of-view quality of the destruction scenes, you should check out Cloverfield. It's more of a horror thriller variant of a monster movie, presented as found footage filmed on a camcorder. Plus, the creature design is kinda reminiscent of the Mutos. And if you just really liked this version of Godzilla, you should watch his next appearance in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla, King of Monsters. That's the third film of the franchise, and has some more big, visually spectacular monster fight sequences. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Godzilla? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite Godzilla movie? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies. The way life should be.